When asking someone about their favorite video game console or favorite generation of consoles, it's pretty common to hear them answer with whatever it is they personally grew up with. And that's not all too surprising. It's hard to overtake the emotions we associate with our earliest introductions to gaming when we first fell in love with the medium all those years ago. For a long time, I assumed this power of childhood memories was the primary reason why so many held the 7th generation in such high regard. But as I've thought about it more, and watched how the industry has progressed over the last several years, I'm left feeling like there is something more to it that goes far beyond basic nostalgia. So let's explore the Wii, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360 generation to figure out what exactly made the era great, and why they now feel so special. For the most part, each console generation is defined by its winners and its losers. Typically, you'll see one console that rises far above the rest, and oftentimes you'll also see one that crashes and burns in the complete opposite direction. For example, the 6th generation saw the Dreamcast bomb so spectacularly that Sega had to drop out of the console race entirely, as Sony dominated the gaming world with PlayStation 2. The 8th generation featured Nintendo's Wii U selling worse than any other home console in their history, while PlayStation 4s were flying off the shelves. And the 9th generation's Xbox Series line fell into a very distant third, leaving their future in serious doubt as Nintendo and PlayStation thrived. But with the 7th generation, everyone was actually pretty happy. All three home consoles on the market sold more than 80 million lifetime units, a mark no other group of systems has even come close to reaching. Sure, the PlayStation 3 got off to a slow start, and yes, the Wii and 360 limped to the finish line, but when it was all said and done, each company could look back on their product and view it as a success. That positive feeling extended to the players of the console as well, because no matter what system you chose, you were most likely satisfied. There was never one console so obviously dead in the water that you felt like an idiot for buying it, or one so overwhelmingly dominant that playing anywhere else seemed like a waste of time. And it may be the only console generation in history where you could legitimately say that. I bring this up because it means no matter where you played, you likely associate positive memories with this generation, whereas basically any other is going to have some out there who had a rough time. I also feel like each console peaked around different times, so there was always something exciting going on. The Wii got out the gate hot with its innovative motion controls that changed the way we played. Early releases like Wii Sports or Super Mario Galaxy were generation-defining experiences that were hard to top. Then, right around the time the Wii became a little too casual for its own good and people were growing tired of the motion controls, Xbox 360 hit its stride, revolutionizing multiplayer with Halo and Gears, alongside third-party games like Call of Duty and Battlefield. In its later years, Xbox 360 went down a questionable path with the Kinect, but now PlayStation was ready to pick up the slack as they were releasing an onslaught of high-quality first-party exclusives throughout the second half of the generation. So it never felt like things got too high or too low. Whenever one company was starting to slip, another was surging, keeping the good times going. Speaking of keeping the good times going, I want to introduce my next major point of discussion: the cadence of game releases we saw throughout the 7th generation. These three consoles came during a very interesting time in gaming history, when photorealism was starting to become achievable, with games able to be larger and more cinematic than ever before. But it was also still early enough along that we had not quite reached the levels we have today, and while that may sound like a bad thing, it may have actually been a benefit. If you've ever taken a look through different Wikipedia pages of prominent game studios, you're going to notice a trend that takes place amongst almost all of them, which is that they used to make a hell of a lot more games than they do now. Such as Naughty Dog, who were able to release the first 3 Uncharted games and The Last of Us all in the PlayStation 3 generation. Now they've only released one actual new video game since 2018. Or how about Rockstar, who used to bring us a new game every other year or so, now getting around to their new mainline releases once every 8 to 10 years. The culprit for this is how much games have progressed, and all the aspects teams need to spend time on that they didn't used to in the past. Capabilities have expanded, And with that, consumer expectations have too. As teams strive to impress with each new entry, those expectations only get harder to live up to, leading to these absurd development timelines we see today. Now, I'm all for visual fidelity, but when I see teams talk about the work they did meticulously detailing every strand of hair on a character's chin, I do start to miss the days when games could just be made in a reasonable amount of time. Because I really don't feel this current crazy level of detail truly helps the actual game in any meaningful way. All it's really done is slow development time to a crawl in pursuit of very diminishing returns, at least in my opinion. I would personally much rather see major performance improvements or new gameplay innovations than a hyper-realistic toenail. At the same time though, I don't blame these dev teams for doing it. Everyone says they want faster dev cycles and cheaper games, but also mock any game that comes out and is not completely flawless. So these huge AAA companies are stuck trying to reach those heights. Back in the 7th generation though, it felt like a sweet spot, where games were very impressive improvements over what came before them, but were still reined in enough that I didn't need to wait a quarter of my life to see the conclusion of a trilogy. To be fair, it's not like these long dev times mean we don't have enough to play. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Despite individual teams taking longer than ever to get projects out the door, there are still way more games being released right now than there were back then. The industry has grown exponentially, causing a never-ending barrage of game releases that can be hard to keep up with. So while it may sound weird since each specific team was making more, there were still less games overall, which I think made the ones we did get feel more meaningful. In a similar vein, I think about indie games, which really came to prominence throughout this generation. For what was really the first time ever, small teams could easily get their games published and released on console storefronts, allowing for a total revolution. Promotions like Summer of Arcade on Xbox 360 were absolutely iconic, bringing us so many wonderful games like Braid, Limbo, Bastion, or my personal favorite, Castle Crashers. And what's interesting is, similar to the AAA market, it was still fairly easy to keep up with everything getting released. Nowadays, the PlayStation Store or Nintendo eShop are filled with so much AI slop and garbage that it can be hard to even browse them effectively. Not to mention all the actual legitimate indie games getting released basically every single day that would have been huge 10 years ago, now getting lost in the shuffle simply because there is too much to play. It is kind of a great problem to have. It's awesome to be able to say there are so many great games to play that it's hard to keep up, but when we think back to the question of why the 7th generation felt so special, I don't think this can be ignored. The fact that there is so much to play now makes the gaming community feel a little less connected in my opinion, because aside from a few rare instances, it doesn't often feel like we are all playing and engaging with the same games like we were back in this era. The days when everywhere you looked there were ads for Halo 3, or every single gamer you knew were loading up Black Ops 2, it just doesn't seem to happen that way anymore. There are exceptions like a GTA 6, but it seems to only come around a few times a generation now, as opposed to the past where each year had its undisputed defining game that everyone was buying and playing. Nowadays, if you don't pay attention for a week, there'll suddenly be some Steam game you've never heard of breaking records. I guess what I'm saying is it feels like we are all in our own little bubbles in a way that we weren't back then, which, funnily enough, brings me to the last major reason why I think the 7th generation was so special: the advancements to online play. Online gaming on consoles had been possible before, but it became far more ubiquitous and was truly perfected during the 7th generation, especially on Xbox 360. Anyone who was there at the time can no doubt think back to the hundreds of hours they spent playing games with their friends and laughing in party chats. There's a very special something to that you just can't get from a traditional single-player game. I'm in no way saying single-player games are inferior. I mean, I play far more of them than multiplayer games myself these days, but when reflecting on how a console generation made us feel, these human connections are hard to ignore. It was also a time when gamers seemed a lot more social in general. I frequently complained to my friends about how annoyed I am that nearly all in-game voice chats are a desolate wasteland nowadays, with everyone opting to just talk in their own personal discords. Back in the 360 PS3 days, you could hop into any game and immediately hear tons of people talking. I mean, hell, the PS3 didn't even have party chat, so you were literally forced to interact with randoms. Sure, you spent half the time muting people playing music directly into their Kinect mic, but man, was it unlike any other era in gaming. gaming history. What I miss most of all, though, was the simplistic beauty of the multiplayer experiences we got back then. Before farming microtransactions was the primary goal, and before every game had to be a live service cash cow that would be shut down at the slightest sign of a declining player base. I mean, remember when 360 PS3 era games used to just have fun multiplayer side modes that went alongside single player campaigns? They weren't worried about how many players it had or how they could monetize it. They just wanted to make something fun. I suppose that's a bit naive to say because obviously the goal of any video game has always been to make money, but back then they at least pretended to hide it. And believe it or not, they occasionally would actually prioritize fun and great gameplay, understanding that the money would eventually come alongside that. Crazy concept, I know, but yes, multiplayer games did used to be like that. Instead of focusing all their time and resources on the next licensed Battle Pass cartoon character, there was an innocence to it all. The way multiplayer games were being made and the way we played them is so different to how it is now. When people talk about how much better multiplayer games were back then, I think that's what they really mean. For most console players, it was the first time they could connect with others around the world and play games in ways they never thought possible. In a time when these consoles were bringing us so many new features like high definition, achievements, motion controls, digital storefronts, online play, and more, it's hard not to look back with rose-colored glasses. I feel like I should acknowledge that the 7th generation was, of course, not perfect. Early gen Xbox 360s dealt with the notorious red ring of death, the Wii was a breeding ground for some of the worst shovelware you'll ever see, and the PlayStation 3 was taken offline by hackers for nearly a full month. And yet, despite those extremely negative aspects, the generation is still viewed through a widely positive lens. That's why I think those bad elements actually only further support the points I've made throughout this video. Because despite many serious issues attempting to drag these systems down, they all still felt pretty damn great. Overall, the 7th generation to me feels like a ton of great coincidences, all lining up to concoct a perfect mixture. Extreme improvements to graphics before it heavily ballooned development timelines, the indie game revolution before console storefronts became overloaded with crap, and the rise of online games before they became live service microtransaction farmers all took place during this era. Combine that with nostalgic childhood memories, and the fact that all three console fan bases were pretty satisfied, and it starts to become clear why this generation is often considered so great. There are consoles out there with better overall life cycles than the PlayStation 3. There are consoles with far higher quality catalogs than the Wii, and there have been consoles that did not spontaneously combust as often as the Xbox 360. But even with all the imperfections, the 7th generation was truly special. It was home to so many throughout their formative years and represents a simpler time, not just in the gaming industry, but in life in general. We'll never be able to get those days back. Not exactly how they were back then anyway, but we'll always have the memories of what I consider to be the absolute best generation in gaming history.